In this video, we're going to talk about the ecological significance of seedless plants. And some of these we've actually talked about in the other videos, but I'm going to kind of put them all together here in one spot. So starting by talking about mosses and liverworts, these are colonizing plants. Colonizing plants tend to be very hardy and able to survive in areas where other plants are not able to survive. So they are often the first plants seen in areas of primary and secondary succession. Primary succession happens when new land is formed, and an example of this would be lava. So, for example, a couple years ago, there were actually some volcanic eruptions in Hawaii that made the island bigger because the lava actually came out of the volcano and solidified and formed new land. Now, lava and the rock that kind of forms after lava cools is not very hospitable to most plants and animals, but these colonizing plants can come in and start to essentially develop almost a base that other plants and animals can then use to move into the area. These colonizing plants are also involved in secondary succession, and secondary succession happens in an area that was at one time inhabited by plants and animals, but then something happened that essentially wiped all the life away. So an example could be something like a forest fire. And so once again, the environment in these areas are typically not very hospitable to life, but these colonizing plants are very hardy and they're able to survive in these kind of harsh environments. And they actually help to develop the land and the soil to allow other plants and animals to be able to recolonize the area. These colonizing plants are typically brought to these areas because the spores are carried by wind or birds or insects, which transport them from one place to another. And they really help to essentially form the base of the food chain in these areas. So they provide food for other organisms. They also provide shelter as other organisms move into the area. The true mosses that are in phylum Bryophyta serve as the base of the food chain in some hostile environments. We talked earlier about the tundra, which has essentially permafrost, or the ground is permanently frozen. And the bryophytes are able to still survive in this area, and it becomes food for herbivores such as caribou and elk. The true mosses don't have roots. Instead, they have these anchoring structures called rhizomes. And these rhizomes are able to hold the moss in place without having to penetrate too far into the frozen ground. True mosses are also able to withstand desiccation, which is just drying out. So if there's a period of time where they don't have access to water, they can kind of go dormant. And then when water is available again, they can become rehydrated and come out of dormancy and become active again. The bryophyta help to make the soil more amenable to other plants. They do this by doing things like nitrogen fixation and potentially making different minerals available to other plants. They do form mycorrhizae with fungi, which helps with that nitrogen fixation as well. The true mosses, can also be used as an indicator of pollution. So as they absorb water across all their tissues, if there's pollution that they are absorbing, then they are sensitive to that. So scientists can actually go out and look at the abundance and diversity of mosses in an area and use it as a metric to look at the quality of the environment. Ferns help with rock weathering. This is basically breaking down rocks to release the minerals that can then go into the soil or help to produce soil. Ferns help to slow erosion because their roots and rhizomes help to kind of anchor or hold soil in place. Some ferns also form a symbiotic relationship with cyanobacteria, and in doing so, they are able to perform nitrogen fixation. And nitrogen fixation is an important part of the nitrogen cycle, in which nitrogen gas in the atmosphere is converted into a form that plants can use. Peat moss is an example of a plant that has some kind of interesting ecological properties to it. First of all, it can be dried and then burned to be used as a fuel source. Peat moss bogs are also used to cultivate cranberries and blueberries. And I remember many years ago, there was actually an ocean spray cranberry juice commercial that showed farmers standing in a bog surrounded by cranberries. And so that kind of gives you a visual of these kind of aquatic areas that were very wet with these cranberries floating around. Peat moss also acts as a soil conditioner by holding moisture in place. And so this helps to prevent itself from drying out, but it can also provide that water to surrounding plants so that they also don't dry out. The coal that we burn for energy also it was provided by these non-vascular plants. So millions of years ago, these plants, survived and then they died and they became buried in these swampy areas. And over a lot of time, millions of years, and a lot of pressure, they essentially were converted into this fossil fuel known as coal. We can now extract coal from the ground and burn it and essentially extract the energy that those plants stored millions of years ago.